Welcome into the midweek mailbag show presented to you guys by Fantasy Points. My name is Nick Skrip. I'm your host of this show every single week where I take questions from Twitter and our Discord for Fantasy Points and answer those questions here on this specific show. It's wild that we are already heading into week 6. Plenty of football already happened, a ton more to go. Lots of questions for what's happened, what to project forward, how to react. And I really enjoy doing this show on a weekly basis, covering different topics. So we have one question from Twitter today, and then the rest are from our Discord. And you should be a part of that Discord as it's our subscribers for Fantasy Points. So if you are not subscribed, make sure you change that. That Discord is awesome. It's very interactive. Have a bunch of people in there talking to each other, talking to some of the analysts from Fantasy Points, and all of the content is pushed into that Discord. So it's well worth the subscription just for that. First question here is from Twitter at 58WKing Podcast. Is Geno Smith's production sustainable? So Geno Smith, QB7 right now for fantasy through 5 weeks, averaging almost 20 points per game, 19.98. He's been hot the last 3 weeks. He's been the QB2, averaging 25.21 fantasy points per game. Now we look ahead to Geno. Arizona, they're number 8 in points per game to QBs. The Chargers, number 13. The Giants, number 23. And then again, the Cardinals, number 8 in points per game given up to the quarterback position. So you have two pretty good matchups coming up, and one being number 13 for the Chargers. That's going to probably push him to pass the ball more, knowing Justin Herbert's going to be doing that a ton. There's some decent matchups to come, so it's not like we are hitting this wall here where Geno is running into the toughest defenses in the league, and he cannot be used for fantasy. Connection to DK and Lockett is evident from Geno Smith. Both are within the top 15 for receiving yards right now. Geno Smith, 325, 320, 268 passing yards the last 3 outings. The first 2 games, he threw for a completion percentage of 80% or higher, 9 touchdowns to 2 interception ratio. So a lot of good signs for what he's done. It's not like he's just hitting one category very well. Decent passing yards, completion rate, touchdowns. Not sure everything will be completely sustainable, but at this rate, if he finished as the QB10 to QB12 for the year, it wouldn't be surprising. Not sure about the QB7. Justin Herbert, Tom Brady, maybe Tua, maybe Cousins are guys currently ranked after him that might close that gap through the season. It's also tough to bank on high efficiency for a 17-week span. He's number 3 in yards per attempt right now. He's number 4 in QBR. He's top 5 in both deep ball and play action completion percentage. So, we can't bank on him being that high in all those categories through the season, but I love what he's doing right now. And he's showing us that he can be a fantasy asset just based off of the weeks he's had so far. Next question is from our Discord here. It's from Pee Wee. Keep/drop AJ Dillon, ? So AJ Dillon, RB33 on the year right now. He's averaging 9.3 fantasy points per game. Just saw his snap percentage hit 32% after being above 50% all of the first 4 games. 15 touches to 6 in Aaron Jones' favor this past week. Week 2, he had 19, though. In week 4, 18 touches. So it might be one of the, he might be one of the best handcuffs. When I say handcuff, I mean if the player in front of him were to be injured, knock on wood, Aaron Jones doesn't, but if he were to be injured, he would take over the job. I think he's one of the better handcuffs to where if he had the full workload, he would be easily a top 10 running back in the league. I think it might be dependent, though, right now on the matchups that they might have. So, like the Jets this week, that's a consideration to put A.J. Dillon in your lineup, especially seeing that he had games of 19 and 18 touches. And that game would probably favor, we would assume, the Green Bay Packers. But when they play Buffalo in week 8, maybe not so much, knowing it's one of the better defenses in the league, and they might be passing the ball a lot more and have Aaron Jones on the field more often than A.J. Dillon. So it's always dependent on who you have, when it comes to playing certain guys in your lineup. Don't drop him. I think you're just holding him right now. I I've seen some people say he's a big buy, and again, the games where he's getting a lot of volume despite Aaron Jones existing, that's a good sign. And we've seen plenty of good AJ Dillon days in the past. I'm pretty sure week 1 he opened up really nice for fantasy, but as of right now, uh, he's not a guy scoring well for fantasy, and I do think that he's going to have bigger games to come. But again, I'm leaning towards like, hey, let's look at the matchup. If it's one the Packers can beat up somebody, then AJ Dillon might be a better play in that one versus that might be chasing the game or going back and forth with one of the better teams. So hold AJ Dillon, don't drop him. I feel like the waivers, depending on your league, can get really thin. So don't open up somebody to get a running back that should never hit the waivers. Next question at Brandon M. Again, the rest are from Discord. I have Higbee as my tight end 2 behind Mark Andrews in a 16-teamer. Should I hold and shrink the already very thin tight end market, or try to trade him for a wide receiver? So right now, you're rocking tight end 1 Mark Andrews and tight end 6 Tyler Higbee. Clear league advantage for the tight end department. So that's evident. And he's saying, hey, like I have this advantage. Should I just hold on to this advantage so nobody else can have a top 10 tight end? I get the mindset that you're making a thin position more thin. You have to think right now, though, if your team is doing good, you are competing with 16 teams right now. But eventually, if you are a competitor, you're going to be competing against the other competitors that might be just your playoff pool. So the amount of teams later as the season goes on that you are competing with is going to gradually shrink when we figure out who's going to actually make the playoffs in your league. I'd also look at Higbee. Higbee having a great season, but he's averaging 12.4 points per game. You mentioned wide receivers. Right now, there are 22 wide receivers alone who have played at least 3 games and are averaging 15 points per game. So Higbee, again, top 7 tight end, averaging 12.4 points per game. Wide receivers being a bigger pool of players, there's 22 wide receivers that are averaging 15 points per game. So I'd focus on making your team the best it can be, because the longer you wait, the less teams you'll have the option to trade with, especially if it's a redraft league. I'd rather trade him now for a wide receiver that you can use every single week and possibly make your team take a leap forward due to that wide receiver maybe having more points per game, versus waiting towards the end of the season and then the people that you have to trade with are just guys that are in the same boat as you in competing in that league. So you might end up trading Higbee right now to a team that doesn't even make the playoffs. So later on, Higbee's not even a factor for you losing him and giving him to somebody else, if that makes sense. So timing is key when it comes to trading. Go capitalize on that wide receiver with Mark Andrews having himself a great season. Next question on the list here, Falcon 02520. What happened to Eli Moore? Once a darling breakout guy to someone who is very underwhelming. This one hurts me a lot. I know Scott Barrett from Fantasy Points has also been a really big Elijah Moore fan. For me, he was a guy that I was full, foot on the gas for coming into the season. Guy I've always been really high on before last season even started, but it looks really rough through 5 weeks. He has yet to score 10 fantasy points, and all of his games played, he's been under 55 receiving yards. He has 0 touchdowns on the year. We came into the season with higher expectations after seeing what he did his rookie season, 3 weeks of 20-plus fantasy points with 4 different Jets quarterbacks, weeks 7 through 13. Not the smallest of spans, but during that span of weeks, he was the wide receiver 3 overall. Now we're looking at the Jets core. Garrett Wilson has 43 targets on the year so far. Tyler Conklin, the tight end, 30. And then all of Elijah Moore, Breece Hall, and Corey Davis have exactly 29. So not the sign you wanted for a guy that we were hoping would break out. Moore was on the field a season low of 66% of the snaps last week. Prior to week 5, though, he was number 2 in routes run for the wide receiver position. He was top 20 in air yards and average depth of his targets through those 4 games before we saw this snap percentage dip. So some signs that he can have some life, with him running a ton of routes and being targeted deeper, but it has yet to connect. So until you see a swing in the target share or any sort of production, he needs to stay on your bench. I don't think he's a cut candidate necessarily, just knowing the talent that he has and knowing what he did last season. But right now, he's got to stay in your bench. I've been guilty of just like plugging him in and waiting for that big week, but the signs right now are not really in his favor. I'm not sure if it's going to take someone being banged up or if those deep targets just start to connect and him get a higher target share. I think that's going to be important for Elijah Moore, who again just has to stay in your bench right now. So this is from Discord as well. It's Fatter. Is Kenny Pickett an every week starter now? So 14.3 fantasy points on 50% of the snaps versus the Jets. And then 13.08 versus the Bills in his first ever start this past week. So week 4 and 5, he got some action. That would make him the QB 20 across the last 2 weeks. And you have to mind that he only played 50% of that game 2 weeks ago. He did play the Bills in week 5, who give up the second least points per game to the quarterback position. So not an ideal fantasy matchup. 4 interceptions so far, 0 touchdowns. He had 3 interceptions in one game. One plus we have seen from Kenny Pickett is the 327 passing yards. So that shows some upside this past week against the Bills. Looks like Pickett has a connection with the other rookie, George Pickens. So it's a mouthful, but Pickett to Pickens. Deontay Johnson, obviously a solid wide receiver, and has proven that. Pat Freiermuth, good young tight end. Chase Claypool, Najee Harris. I mean, there's plenty of pass catchers to utilize. We can knock the O-line and we can knock how this team has looked to start the season. But I thought they moved the ball okay this past game, in his first start. So Tampa Bay, Miami, Philadelphia, those are 3 good teams to come on the schedule. Pickett had 52 attempts last game. I'm not sure that these games will make him throw the ball 50-plus times in all of them, but there's definitely going to be some passing volume to come through the year. So I'm not there yet when it comes to him being a weekly fantasy starter. I don't think that we have a clear reason outside of, hey, the guys he's throwing to as a whole are pretty good. Like I'd agree to that. But if you want to roster him, that's fine. But I wouldn't be comfortable placing him in my lineup just yet without seeing more, especially with some of these tougher matchups to come. So Kenny Pickett, roster him if you'd like to. We saw a glimpse of passing yard upside. I'd hesitate on actually playing him unless you are in a terrible spot and have, to juggle him in Cooper Rush or Baker Mayfield, or I guess it's PJ Walker now, but you kind of get the gist of where I'm heading with that. So last question on the Discord here. It's from Discord. And this question was, it started from one person talking about being 0-5, and then some other people were chiming in. So I just wanted to bring up this question as like a general, hey, I'm 0-5. What do I do? So I want to give one example, a personal example. Last year in a home keeper league, I started off 0-5. I gradually made my way to 2-5. I finished the year under 500, but the whole division I was in was under 500, except for the number 1 seed. So I made playoffs based off of my points scored, which is, the next tier of how it went for the playoffs. I kept playing the waiver wire. I made probably 2 trades that had a good impact on my roster and were pretty risky, but I made 2 trades that maybe I lost, but I thought made my team better, which I think is important at times. And I went to the playoffs and I went to the finals, actually, with that 0-5 star team, and I lost in the final. But the perk of that is I won some cash, right? Because if you go if you finish in second place, you're obviously making probably triple the money or double the money that you entered the league with. So that was all for me, just like not throwing in the towel super early. And the concern typically is redraft focus when it comes to something like this. Because teams in your dynasty leagues, if they're 0-5, they'll say they're rebuilding, or maybe they already were going into the season as a rebuild team. And you can always trade and still be super active if you never win a game in a dynasty league for a season, because you can continue to make moves to build for next year and the year after, and so on. Contenders and rebuilders target each other in trades, and that's kind of just how dynasty works. Send the older veterans to the guy that might win the league, and hopefully you can get some picks and younger guys in return. When it comes to redraft, though, I think people get pretty discouraged too early on, because you have to keep in mind that your streak of your streak of wins can be somebody else's streak of losses. So again, if you win 3 in a row, there's a chance that somebody in your division, if you play in a league with 2 divisions, loses 3 games in a row. Now you're closing that gap between you and somebody else, or you and 2 guys in your division. So fantasy can be streaky. If you're going a good streak of wins, you don't know what's going to happen between the rest of your division. So don't throw in the towel too early. There's plenty of football left to go. But even if you come to a point where you really don't feel confident that you are going to make playoffs, there's probably a good chance you paid for your league. So just enjoy it. Sounds like easier said than done because we're all competitive. But if it comes to a point where, hey, it's the last couple weeks, I'm not going to make playoffs, why not still set your lineup and compete and have some bragging rights over your friends? And it's fun to set your lineup and then watch your guys play on Sunday and see how it does. Like, that aspect of fantasy shouldn't change. I mean, the part that changes is if you're out of the playoffs is the part where you're making money. Which is what we all want to do, or maybe if it's you're playing for a belt or a trophy or whatever the case is, but don't throw it up. You paid for the league most likely, so just play it out the rest of the season. Set your lineups. You can continue to trade, but if you have a rough start, you likely need to do something to change the outlook of your team. So don't just sit back. I would be hitting the waiver wire. I'd be throwing darts at guys that can potentially break out. I'd be sending a lot of trades right now. I would. If you don't like how your team's performing and you're really behind the ball right now, but you have like 2 studs, maybe you sell both studs and you even out the makeup of your roster. So plenty of ways to still stay active. I'd say still get after it, again, because of what I said with the streaks, but you have to actively do something if your team is just really far behind right now. If you got a bunch of good guys that have just underperformed, that's one thing. I'm in a league right now where I really love my team. I have guys like I have Austin Eckler and Nick Chubb on the same team with Dalvin Cook, all 3 of those running backs. And I just won my first game of the season, but I know that this team could compete. But I'll be a little more patient with that one versus, hey, this team's doing bad. None of my guys are looking like they're going to be studs this year. I only have 1 or 2 guys. I have to be aggressive now and make moves. So just kind of how fantasy works, and trading and building a roster is the fun part of it. So don't throw in the towel just yet. You can bounce back. But thank you guys for tuning into this midweek mailbag episode. I always ask for questions on Twitter and Discord and then answer them on the show. So be on the lookout in the Discord chat for me asking for them, or on Twitter through the Fantasy Points Media page. I'll ask on there as well. Good luck in week 6, and let's keep plugging away.